Hey everyone, it's Sunday here at the Chateau, and I thought I'd shoot a video. A little reflection. I was just having some deep thoughts recently, and I thought maybe I'll talk about them a little bit. We also got a drone, so while I'm talking, I'm going to throw in some shots, cool shots of the drone. And this one's kind of a, just thinking about life talk a little bit. So, and I will reference Christianity. So if, again, if that's a trigger for you, just look at the drone shots, put on some nice music or something like that. But yeah, let's talk about life. It's Sunday. I've had a bit of a paradigm shift. Are you familiar with that phrase? A paradigm shift, it's when you look at something differently. Like, you've kind of, you think you understand something, and then you kind of like look at it from here and you're like, oh, that's like a different angle on it. And I've kind of had a bit of a paradigm shift with the Chateau. Now, there's a bunch of things we've always believed about the Chateau. Like, for example, it's part of the patrimony. It's part of France's history, and it needs to be preserved and kept. I still believe that strongly. We want to be faithful to the original design, and we don't want to just come in and modernize. Like, we want it to look like a Chateau, and we want it to be there for generations. That hasn't changed. You'd like to not lose your shirt. Again, we're nonprofit, so we're not trying to make money, but you wouldn't like to lose everything. So that's one of my kind of original thoughts. But as I've been looking at the Chateau, I've changed my thinking a little bit. Our owner, the man who sold us the Chateau, came by the other day, and he was mowing his half the land over there. It was great, and he pulled me aside for a second. He's been very helpful, and he'll show me things occasionally. And he pointed out a couple things. In fact, I'll show you them on the video. He showed me some cracks, and some of these cracks have been there for a long time. I've gone back and looked at some of the photos, and you can see them. And so that's good news, because new cracks are scary, especially for North Americans. We're not used to cracks in our building. New cracks are scary, because you're thinking, are things shifting? Again, it's a big stone building. Will it fall? Will it be safe? And so he showed me these two cracks. Now notice they're right on the front facade, on the outside of the two corners here. There's a crack running up and running up. And then he took me to the basement, and he showed me. He went down to the basement, and he showed me just the way the structure is organized. And it's kind of like there's columns that run all the way down in between the windows, and they transfer the weight into the foundation. But in between you've got the three windows, and then below that there's three open spaces for doors. And the middle one's been reinforced with concrete. So at one point, someone came through and put like kind of a concrete bearing, not an arch, but the same idea, just to carry the weight of the Chateau. So that's good. But the two outside ones do not. They just have wood beams, and they're old wood beams. And when you look at them closely, you can see that one is maybe a little lower than the other. And it's probably over time, the beam is sagging. Possibly it's gotten wet. That beam is right next to the bottom of the terrace, so it's possible that water gets down in there, or even from our dish room. Who knows, leaching up from the ground. But in any case, the wood is not great. And so even when we got it, it had one of those telescoping security poles, and so that was great to hold it up. But perhaps it sagged further, and so that's very concerning. Immediately, I called a bunch of structural engineers in the area to come take a look. Although, before you get too worried, and by the way, if you're looking at the videos, it is kind of worrying, isn't it? In fact, you can look at the front doors from the inside, and you can see that there's an offset. Like, you can see, it's at one point has shifted enough that it's a little bit out of whack. And so that's deeply troubling. So I called the structural engineers. I also called a couple of my building friends, and it's, in some ways, they kind of laughed at me. They're kind of like, oh, the North American. My friend Jeremy had a great line. He goes, oh, there's a crack. He's like, can you put your hand in it? And I said, no. And he said, don't worry about it. And the idea is that a lot of these old buildings over here have cracks. It's not unusual, but very, very uncomfortable for us. And so, so I had a couple bad sleeps. I'll be honest, really bad sleeps. First thing I did is I went and got a bunch of those poles, and I got some big beams, and we kind of shorted up a little bit temporarily while we're waiting for the guys to come. Probably concrete or cinder blocks would carry the weight a lot better, but it's a stopgap in case this is something that is an active situation. But also, you know, I just lay there at night thinking about stuff, and you're always thinking like, oh man, that'd be terrible if, like, you know, because as we've mentioned in previous videos, you can see there used to be, if you look at the old postcards, you can see there used to be chimneys on the front corners, and one of them fell in the 80s, and then he brought the other one down just so that it would match, you know, about 10 years ago or so, 20 years ago. So, you know, nothing's secure. You can't be guaranteed anything. And by the way, insurance is probably not going to help you, right? I mean, you can't insure against time, I don't think. I mean, I'd be shocked if insurance would cover you for that. So really, it's dangerous. And I guess what I've been thinking about the Chateau, and I've been thinking about it recently as a depreciable asset. Are you familiar with that term, depreciable asset? I'm not a math major, but I do understand math a little bit and finances a little bit. And you know, you have certain things that you buy that gain value and certain things that lose value. Like, for example, a car is always a terrible purchase because, I mean, you need a car, but it's not a good financial purchase because it's a depreciable asset. It just gets, you know, it gets less value over time until it's worth basically nothing. And so any money you put into cars is ultimately wasted usually. A house is usually better. It's usually inflation resistant. As inflation goes up and money's worth less, the house retains its value pretty good. Sometimes it'll go up in price. I mean, relative to inflation, it doesn't go up that high. I'm probably losing people with the math, so I should stop. But all that to say, usually land is usually a pretty safe investment, you know, financially. But a chateau may be different. 165 years old, maybe a bit of a depreciable asset. And so in that case, then you have to look at it differently. Obviously, we want to take care of it. We want to shore it up as best we can. But even if we do all the right things, there's no guarantee that this thing will last forever. And in fact, it's pretty much guaranteed that after enough time, it will fall. I mean, gravity will win. That's how nature works. We can put a brand new roof on it, but water will find a way to get in eventually. You know, maybe dozens of years, might be hundreds of years. Hopefully it's after us. But a depreciable asset. So, and then the question becomes, if it's a depreciable asset, what are we going to do with it? You guys know we're attempting to run a study abroad program for young people, you know, bring them in and have them explore their world and explore themselves and connect with their faith and with other people. And so that's gone really well. And I started to think about, here's the trigger warning for religion. I started to think about one of the parables, one of the most difficult parables in the New Testament to understand. This is a parable that's really kind of weird if you haven't thought about it for a bit. Okay, so there's a parable. It's called the parable of the shrewd manager. And in the parable, there's this guy who's kind of a lousy worker and kind of a cheat. And so his boss discovers that he's cheating. And he's like, I'm going to fire this guy. And so he's like, I'm going to fire this guy. And so the guy thinks to himself, he's like, what am I going to do? He's like, I'm basically too weak to work. Like, I can't go dig trenches. And I'm too lazy and weak, and I'm too poor to just support myself. So he's like, how am I going to take care of myself? And so what he does is he's completely dishonest. He goes to all his boss's clients, and he goes, hey, you owe the boss like 10,000. Let's make it 6 real quick. Just you're paid up, and we'll write you off the books. And so he cheats the books, and with several customers, and the idea is he's trying to buy friends so that after he gets fired, someone will help take care of him and they'll remember his kindness. So at this point, you're reading the parable and you're thinking, this guy's the worst ever, and you're thinking Jesus is going to go off on this guy, because usually the Bible is like, you know, don't lie and be fair and be compassionate and love other people. In fact, there's a whole whackload of verses in the Old Testament and Proverbs that talk about the Lord hating dishonest scales and, you know, buyers that lie when they're going to buy stuff. Like, you know, social justice and fairness is a deeply seated theme in the New Testament. So you're kind of expecting Jesus to go, man, that guy's terrible. But in the parable, the master applauds. What's the word? He doesn't applaud. He doesn't condemn. He praises the dishonest manager because of his shrewdness. He goes, you were smart. You played it well. Good work. And those of us reading are going, what? And then Jesus follows up the story with a line that's interesting. He goes, use worldly wealth, something to the effect of use your money and your possessions basically to forward the kingdom of God. And the big idea is that stuff will not last. And that is an idea that runs throughout the New Testament. Like stuff and money, you can't keep it, you know. It talks about rust destroying and moths eating clothes, and you lose money, and eventually you die, and you can't keep your stuff. And so then then Jesus can say something like, he does in the book of Luke. He goes, a man's life, watch out, he goes, beware of all kinds of greed. And he goes, because a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That means it's not just like the more stuff you have, the better your life is. It's not. And so this story seems to suggest that what we should do is because since stuff doesn't matter, and since ultimately we're going to die and our stuff, it won't matter how much stuff we had, we should use our stuff for good, to be about the work of the kingdom. And I guess that's kind of a Christian phrase, work of the kingdom. And by that I mean like feeding the hungry, rescuing the lost, showing kindness to the unloved, showing forgiveness, bringing peace to warring factions. This is all part of the work of the kingdom. And so in a lot of ways, that is a comforting, even though it's a weird parable, it's a comforting parable to me, because that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to use this thing as a depreciable asset. Again, please hear me, especially if you're our French neighbors. We want to be respectful to this thing. We want to, preserve it as best we can for the patrimony and for our neighbors, because it belongs to France. On the other hand, we also want to use it to do good in the world. We want to use it to help people. And so that actually makes me sleep a little better. It's a depreciable asset. How long will that front facade last? I mean, we'll put the concrete under it, and maybe it'll last for another 200 years. Maybe I'm overthinking things because I'm just a North American that's not used to cracks, or maybe a whole wall will fall tomorrow. There's just no guarantee. But as long as we're using this thing for good, in some ways it doesn't matter what happens to it, right? Because where we end up financially coming out of this, and is immaterial. It doesn't matter if we end rich or poor, because when you die, what does it matter? So the question is, what are you going to do with your stuff? And this is what we're trying to do with our stuff. Okay, so that was deep. It's a Sunday. Hope you stayed with me. Just had deep thoughts. Wanted to share them. Hope your day's going good. And I don't again. I'm not pitching for money, But if maybe there's something in your world where you can help somebody. Maybe there's like somebody on your street, like a neighbor that's in trouble, or maybe an orphan or a widow or single parent, or some folks that are just having financial difficulty. Maybe you can help them out a little bit, or maybe you got a car, you can drive some kids to camp. I don't know. There's lots of ways to make the world better. Maybe you can give some money to the starving folks in different parts of the world. Hope you can find something. This is what we're going for. Hoping it works out. Thanks.